Financial lessons I should have learned in school. Taxes. Welcome to Lesson 6 of the Financial Lessons Tax course. This lesson will focus on tax liability. If you owe taxes, there are a number of aspects to be considered. While there are consequences if the liability is not met, there are also different options to help resolve the debt and avoid some of those negative consequences. We will discuss those options in our next lesson, but for now, let's learn more about tax debt or tax liability. The first item of discussion that I see most with clients are back taxes. Back taxes are those returns that have not been filed from previous years. It is important to file these so that you are able to avoid the negative consequences associated with them, such as a failure to file penalty, which can cost you between 5% to 25% of your unpaid tax. Interest and penalties on balances. The IRS begins to accrue those interests and penalties from the date that the tax is due up until the date that it is paid. You could suffer loss or forfeiture of your refund after 3 years. So the IRS typically only honors refunds that are due within 3 years. And I've had clients to come to me who had 6 years of back taxes. And on some of those years, they were due a refund, but since it was outside of the statute of 3 years, they were not able to get those refunds back. So you don't want to wait, because if you do, you may not get back money that's owed to you. There is no statute of limitations for collection. So if you owe taxes from 10 years ago, the IRS can still come after you for those taxes. One of the negative consequences of not filing your returns on time and or not paying enough taxes during the tax year are penalties and interests. Anytime you owe a penalty or an interest charge, the IRS is going to notify you. And typically they notify you by mail. They're going to send a letter in the mail, and it's going to outline the tax liability as well as any penalties or interest that you owe on that tax liability. There are different types of penalties. You have underpayment of estimated tax, which is one of the most common. When people don't pay enough taxes throughout the tax year, they may face this type of penalty. Failure to file, when you don't file for years at a time, or failure to pay when you owe and you don't pay. The amount of penalty is going to range anywhere between 0.5% up to 25% of the amount of unpaid tax each month that you owe until you pay the entire liability. Interest accrues on unpaid tax as well. And the interest rate is going to be determined quarterly, and it is the federal short-term rate plus 3%. So what this means is that if you have back taxes, you need to have them filed immediately. If you owe taxes, make arrangements to pay them. We're going to talk more in the next lesson about payment arrangements, that you don't have to have all the money right then. The IRS is run by people who understand that you may not have all the money at one given time, and you may need to make payments, but you need to make arrangements to at least start to try and pay on your liability so that you don't face further consequences. And then make sure that you pay adequate taxes throughout the year to avoid further issues. An eventual and probably the most impactfully negative consequence of failing to pay back taxes is having a lien or levy imposed. A lien is where the IRS makes a legal claim against property that you own to secure payment of a tax debt. And then a levy is the actual seizure of that property to satisfy the tax debt. That's where they actually take possession of the property, they sell it so that they can get the money that you owe them. You want to avoid this at all costs. To avoid this, you should arrange to pay your back taxes as soon as possible. One way to do this is by applying for a payment plan, which we will discuss in our next lesson. So in summary, it is important to file your taxes on time each year. And there are negative consequences related to late or failure to file your taxes, so you definitely don't want to get behind on that. And you don't want to just ignore it. I get a lot of clients who just ignore it as if it's going to go away. It's not. So you need to make sure that you're addressing these things and work with a tax professional. They can help you with setting up these payment plans and getting things back on track so that you can get yourself out of that hole and back to where you need to be financially. In our next lesson, we will discuss what you can do if you owe taxes.